Chaos Merchants is based on Tupac 187 by R.J. Bond and Michael Douglas Carlin. They toppled the host, many gave up the ghost. A lot of people have died that were directly or indirectly tied to this investigation. 291, Brent Becker. He also said Neckbone would be killed later because he knew the identity of the shooters. Neckbone was in fact killed at a later date. Something Heron knows got him smoked. Murders in immediate aftermath of Tupac Shakur's murder were those affiliated, witnesses, or with knowledge of the murder. Yak Fula was an assassination hit, and Death Row Records were the first to call it a suicide. We have the tapes of telephone calls between Frank Alexander and various Death Row insiders about this murder. Also, we have the FBI report that states this was an execution murder. See below. Ken Knox, senior lead, details in a police report that New Jersey Crips and Los Angeles Bloods are together in Death Row's Can-Am studios together a few weeks before Yak Fula is assassinated in New Jersey. David Kenner is contacted by Las Vegas police to arrange the interview of Yak Fula. Kenner never arranges the interview, and Fula is killed before Las Vegas investigators can find him on their own. Michael Moore tries to get Frank Alexander to flip to their story so he isn't killed. Too many people are accidentally dying. Why wait for an accident to happen? You go on the other side and you are targeted. They feared that Suge would retaliate. That is why they killed his inner circle before he got out of prison to weaken Suge from putting together muscle to retaliate upon his release. Reggie Wright Jr. has ties through his father to Compton police who attempted to steer the investigation toward a conclusion that Orlando Anderson was the shooter in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Orlando Anderson has an airtight alibi as Las Vegas has cameras everywhere. Corey Edwards tells of seeing Orlando Anderson at the bar about the time of the shooting. Las Vegas police are handed Orlando Anderson by Compton police during a raid. They are expected by Compton police to arrest him as he is being handed up on a silver platter as the shooter. Las Vegas police are not even interested in him because they already know about his airtight alibi. Compton police established this pattern when they also steered the investigation in the El Rey Theater murder of Kelly Jamerson and stopped LAPD investigators from issuing indictments. Frank Alexander secret recordings of his telephone calls with Death Row insiders and reporter Chuck Phillips give insight into the inner working of Death Row Records and their ties to Phillips in creating false stories that are planted in the LA Times. Chuck Phillips is dismissed when he is caught fabricating a story about the murder of Tupac Shakur, thus solidifying the planting of stories to throw investigators and public opinion off the trail of the real killers of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. September 17. A confidential informant tells police that Marion Hugh Knight delivered a load of AK-47 assault rifles to gang members at Nickerson Gardens. Caffey also discussed the incident on 9/16/96 with the gangster caravan attempted vehicle stop by Jeter and Yamamoto. An informant advised him that on 9/17/96, AK-47s were delivered in Nickerson Gardens by Suge Knight's crew and that these same guns were in the aforementioned caravan on 9/16/96. There have already been 9 separate drive-by shootings between the Piru Bloods from Compton and the Southside Compton Crips. Reggie called me. This is about 30 minutes before this happened. Reggie called and cursed me out and everything. As I said, the majority of the time, I would always drive Tupac around. And so I asked Reggie about 2 days later, he says that fucking Frank didn't have his gun, this and that, so on and so on. I said, Reggie, I thought you had it all arranged in advance with some attorney they were dealing with down there. Some attorney that they had at the time, something to do with the Club 662, that all the guys were going down there prior to get authorization from the Vegas police, to carry firearms, which generally they will do it, but you have to go down there in a timely fashion. 2 days after Tupac is shot, Kevin Hackey is using the telephone at the hospital to talk to the FBI. A doctor overhears his conversation and asks him who he is providing information to. The Las Vegas Metro Police Department cops get involved in a turf war and object to Hackey discussing their case with the FBI and give Hackey until 8 p.m. to get out of town. When Reggie hears about this, he becomes suspicious of Hackey and starts calling him a snitch. September 16, 1996. AM Watch officers Jeter and Yamamoto were working a crime suppression detail to address gang activity problems at Death Row Records. 18730 Oxnard Street, Suite 211. Officer Jeter spoke with the head of security at Death Row, Reggie Wright, and was informed by Mr. Wright that since the death of Tupac, Marion Hugh Knight was now using gangsters, Bloods, from Compton as his own personal bodyguards and that they were armed. Officer Jeter was familiar with Knight's personal vehicle, which was there at the time. At approximately 0500 hours, Jeter's and Yamamoto observed 4 vehicles leaving Death Row Records in gang caravan fashion. The officers observed Suge Knight in the middle vehicle of the caravan. The officers attempted to stop Suge Knight's vehicle, but were interfered in making the stop by the rear vehicle, a green Humvee driven by rapper MC Hammer. Subsequently, Hammer was Q&R warned only. Knight and the rest of the gang caravan eluded the police. They said Neckbone knew the identity of the shooters and that he would be killed. Neckbone was subsequently killed in Texas. Buntry was in a car with Reggie Wright Sr. When he got out to pump gas, somebody killed him. Buntry was the heavy muscle of Suge. Reggie Wright Jr. was the one that brought Malcolm Greenridge to that interview. We need to talk to Yak Fula. Brent Becker said he left messages with David Kenner about interviewing Yak Fula. He got the runaround and then was notified that he was murdered in New Jersey. The only thing I heard, and I heard it from Reggie Wright Jr., is that earlier that year, around April timeframe, that Trayvon had gotten into a fight at the Lakewood Mall in a Foot Locker and was with Orlando Anderson. Under the plan, Kenner and Wright Jr. had devised Suge's death was preferable, but Suge being incarcerated with no ability under California law to conduct business from prison was a very secure position for them. They had Suge drained of all the working capital out of the bank accounts. They eliminated the accountant, financial records, and stopped all of the activity within the company. The employees were not being paid, and loyalty to Suge was waning. Still, Reggie wasn't worried about money. He said to Michael Moore, "We won't be wanting for anything." He confided in Michael Moore because he knew he had no choice. He knew that Michael Moore had heard "Got Him" come over Wright's radio at the time of the Tupac shooting and attempted murder of Suge. They exchanged a glance. As long as Reggie could pay Moore, he would remain silent. Reggie invented work for Moore. He already had a full-scale mop-up in the aftermath of the shooting. Well, that didn't work. I said, Reggie, if he had like 20 guys working security, off-duty cops. I said, why would you have all of those guys over here at the hotel and have one guy with Tupac? Now, all the time Tupac has been out and I've been with him, I always went by myself. It was just me and him all the time. About 2 weeks prior, actually 2 weeks before he was shot, about 1:30 in the morning on Sunset up here, we saw the sheriffs rode up. We were at Sunset and I can't think of the cross street right where Sunset and West Hollywood turns into Beverly Hills. They wanted to go out clubbing. Tupac was driving a Rolls with all the outlaws in the back. I was in the back of the car. A couple of guys came up along his car and they, early model Toyota sedan, dark colored black guys, gang members, started flashing all kinds of signs, whatever, this and that. I'm like, damn, here I am by myself. I exit my car, using caution going up, and I pulled my badge and I said, look guys, I'm an off-duty cop. Just go ahead and get out of here. So they started all sorts of bullshit, this and that. So of course, the group with Tupac, they started acting, come on now, let's fight, motherfuckers, this and that. So by that time, I told the driver, I said, let me see your hands like this. No, man, fuck, he ain't going to do this and that. I said, look, motherfucker. By this time, I pulled my gun down at the side. I said, look, get your ass on. It is like this. So they turned around and he says, oh man, geez, he has got a gun. And they sped off. I was like, damn. I put my gun up. We go to Sunset in Fairfax. I believe it is an Arco AM PM up there. I told Tupac, I said, what the fuck are you doing? I mean, getting out here at 1:30 in the morning to get some cigarettes, this and that. And I'm like, damn, his Rolls Royce is here. The Cadillac is behind it, this and that. So I see Saturday night detectives pull up, either West Tech or Bel Air Patrol. Two big fat guys. So I said, damn, They think they really got something here, I'm sure. So, but by the time I see 150 unit pull up, so I kind of approach him. I have a badge in hand. He says, "We just got a call, a 211. Somebody trying to rob Tupac Shakur." By that time, it was Christmas. They had every car in West Hollywood and then some go to that location. And so, of course, I asked Reggie. I said, knowing what went on the 2 weeks prior, why would you have him there by himself? And why would you have him, Frank is not even a cop. Why wouldn't he at least have one of the retired cops or the off-duty cops? Because he had quite a few off-duty cops working at the time. So why wouldn't he have one of them with him, basically? I'm not saying that, when you go into Vegas, basically most of the time they give you common courtesy. But I'm saying at least they would have had their firearms with them because based upon the fact Reggie was supposed to set everything up for these guys to go down to file the paperwork for Vegas, which they never did. So he just kind of shunned away from that, didn't say anything about it. And Frank said basically, they threatened him because Frank left town thereafter. I think a couple of hours later, he got himself and got out of there. Basically, they threatened him what was going to happen. And, of course, Hodgman's office started calling him down once they are going to go ahead and revoke Suge's probation. So basically, he got threatened then. Frank had called me in early November. Reggie wanted him to come out to the office. So I was on duty that night. So I drove over there and met Frank. And he says, can you please stand by? I said, I really don't want to get involved with this mess. So whoever the attorney was in there with Reggie, they knew that I was out. I was on duty. They knew I was out there. And he said, don't bring fucking Kevin's ass in here because he is all pissed off. And so, I figured by that time, of course, his daddy started leaking things in. Well, of course, I had been talking with the FBI and so on, and about, I would say March of last year, March or February, I get a call from Reggie out of the blue. "Kevin, I need a favor. Can you drive for me?" This and that. I'm like, "What? Can I drive for you?" I said, "Reggie, what do you think I am? Fucking stupid?" I said, "You know me well enough to know right now," I said, "if you want to do something to me, you want to go ahead and take me out?" I said, "Be a man. Take me out." Because he knows if he comes up against me one-on-one, he will lose. Reggie says, "Oh, fuck you, motherfucker. I could have you killed at any given time." I said, "Reggie, you know where I'm at." I said, "You know it is your ball game. Do what you got to do." But as I said again, hey, he's trying to set me up. He hadn't talked to me for 4 or 5 months. He said I was a snitch, the whole shebang, this and that. And then all of a sudden he calls me up and he wants me to drive for him. I'm surprised Reggie's not in prison. I know he used to hold money. I know he used to handle shit. Without a catalyst, they would have never received the full cooperation of the Compton Police Department. The murder of Bobby Finch, close to home for the department, provided that catalyst. He was the brother of Larry Finch, who was a police officer at the Compton School Police. That made the Tupac murder investigation personal for all of the Compton cops. That made them emotional, easier to steer into certain directions, and impassioned to put Suge Knight away. For as long as they had nobody to charge with Tupac or Bobby Finch's murder, they could vent their anger on Suge. When Reggie Wright Sr. suggested they get involved in putting Suge away, they all lined up to participate. Now it wasn't if, as Wright Sr. had speculated, but it became a certainty that something was going to happen to Suge. September 11. Bobby Finch is killed in a drive-by shooting at 1513 May Street. His brother is a Compton School police officer. Corey Edwards tells investigators, "I warned my neighbor Bobby Finch and his brother Larry about the mob pyro probably riding through our neighborhood. Bobby and Larry aren't gang members. Bobby did security and bodyguard work. His brother Larry, who works for Compton Unified School District as a school police officer, has his own security company. Bobby would do security work for his brother at clubs and also work for this lawyer named Mitch. Bobby was one of Mitch's bodyguards. Bobby also did the security for Tashina Arnold, the actress from the television show Martin." Wednesday, September 11, 30-year-old Bobby Finch dropped off his 10-year-old daughter at 1513 South Mayo, his mother's home in Compton. The home was located in the south end of the Southside Crips known territory. Finch also felt safe. The violence of the past few days would not affect him. Besides, it was too early. Most gang members were awake till all hours of the night. Their mornings were spent snoring or recovering from hangovers caused by 40-ounce bottles of cheap malt liquor. Sitting behind the wheel of his new Acura, a Honda Civic hatchback pulled up. Someone just drove up alongside and blasted him, said an LAPD homicide detective. So why kill Bobby Finch? If you're going to steer the investigation from within the Compton police, you have to get them in the game. Nothing raises the stakes more than a killing close to home of someone they consider to be family. Make the investigation personal. Dupe them into believing that Southside Crips and Mob Pyru are engaged in a war and they will unleash all disposable resources to get the killers. But who actually killed Bobby Finch? Kevin Hackey tells investigators, I called Reggie and I said, Reggie, Finch's brother just got killed. How do you know about that? Whatever. I mean, the dispatcher at the Compton School Police, Barbara, just called me. This occurred within like 3 or 4 minutes because one of the officers from Compton College, because Compton College Police, Mario, he works part-time for Compton School District Police, where Bobby lived and was like within 2 blocks of the college. So, being they hear the gunshots, Mario was the first guy there as soon as Bobby got shot. And I called Reggie 3 or 4 minutes later, and the incident just occurred. Because when Mario called for help from, the Compton College paramedics, our units were there right then. There is no way in hell Reggie being in Vegas, Reggie would have known that soon if they hadn't already set it up. Finch was a setup. He walked out to his car, got in the car, going to take off. Some guy pulled up in a sedan and pumped a couple of rounds through the car. He left his house. Based upon the statement that Reggie had made to me, he basically said to me, don't mention that to Suge. I already know about it. I'm like, well, how did you know? This just happened within the last 3 or 4 minutes. Reggie Wright Jr. talks to his father about the upcoming raids and gets information so that he can prepare the gangs for what was about to happen. They were able to steer the investigation to locations that had been swept before the raids occurred. Get rid of the guns. Tim Brennan excludes Danny Patton from the list of blood gang members at the end of his affidavit. But what wasn't certain was who was going to run Death Row Records. After the shooting in Vegas, but before Suge's arrest, he was using his inner circle as bodyguards instead of Reggie or right-way personnel, as was customary. Reggie saw this as an opportunity to snitch on Suge by telling police about this clear probation violation. 9/16/96, 1200 to 0500 a.m. Watch officers Jeter and Yamamoto were working a crime suppression detail to address gang activity problems at Death Row Records, 18730 Oxnard Street, Suite 211. Officers Jetters spoke with the head of security at Death Row, Reggie Wright, and was informed by Mr. Wright that since the death of Tupac, Marion Hugh Knight was now using gangsters, Bloods, from Compton as his own personal bodyguards, and that they were armed. If Reggie was going to regain Suge's trust, he was going to need to show him the ultimate grand gesture. As the hearing approached, Reggie and Kenner appeared to be working hard to secure Suge Knight's freedom. They also appeared to have a major setback when it was learned that Frank Alexander, the only credible witness, had told investigators that Suge had kicked Orlando Anderson. Reggie made it very public that Frank was now a rat, a snitch, and that he should be killed. Those rumors got back to Frank quickly. There were many of Frank's friends offering confirmation. Death Row Records wants you dead. Reggie even threatened Frank directly. What are you and your white wife going to do? Go into hiding? So many people had, quote, accidents. Yak Fula had been executed and Death Row Records issued rumors about Yak's death as having been an accident and then as a suicide. They never passed up an opportunity to create confusion and sell fear. The confusion caused anything that wasn't nailed down to disappear. The bank accounts were intact. The music masters had been safely moved, but many of the things laying around disappeared between Suge's arrest and his being transferred to prison to serve his 9-year stretch. Lots of furniture and records were moved to Glendale to create venue problems for investigators wanting to issue search warrants, and some of the stuff was being shipped out of state. Suge Knight was being kept in the dark of most of what was happening on the outside. He was arrested with almost no time to prepare for a long absence at the helm of Death Row Records. The book Murder Rap is released that pins the murders of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace on the dead guys. The book is written by Greg Kading, who was close to Reggie Wright Jr., a suspect in the Biggie Smalls killing, and is now a suspect in the Tupac Shakur killing. Greg Kading admits in the book that he had no access to the Christopher Wallace civil trial documents, which excludes the most significant portion of the case. The book follows the same storyline as the previously planted stories by LA Times journalist Chuck Phillips. Greg Kading is also the former lead detective on the Christopher Wallace homicide and previous partner of Darren Dupree. Dupree is the cop that leaked the confession letter to Kading. Kading had an additional motive to derail the confession letter, his book and movie deal that would prove worthless if the case is solved in an alternate way. Kading contacts journalist Chris Blatchford and further attempts to derail the letter with Chris. His emails are very similar to the Chuck Phillips secret tape recording made by Frank Alexander, where instead of asking questions, they attempt to sell a conclusion. On June 24, 2014, Russell Poole and R.J. Bond met with 4 representatives from LAPD and provided them with a copy of the confession letter. They place special marking on the letter and receive assurances that the information will be investigated. Instead, it is leaked. 6 days after the letter appears on the internet, Suge Knight is shot in a West Hollywood nightclub by assailants that yell, "You killed Tupac," as they fire shots at Knight. The attempt to derail the confession letter is traced back to Reggie Wright Jr. Darren Dupree, one of the cops that Russell and RJ gave the confession letter to, was Greg Kading's partner, who was a close friend and apologist of Reggie Wright Jr., implicated in the letter as responsible for the murder of Tupac Shakur and the attempt on Suge Knight on September 7, 1996. Greg Kading was first person to talk about the letter on internet after it was given to LAPD. The confession letter given to LAPD had special markings that appeared on the internet with those markings. The LAPD leak is clearly documented and is the subject of an internal affairs investigation, CF number 14-001995. Keep in mind that Darren Dupree illegally accessed LAPD computers and cloned cell phones and was reprimanded by LAPD, and Greg Kading was responsible for overturning the George Torres Ramos case by what the judge said was his reckless disregard for the truth. Tupac had begun to recover. When he died, there was a rush to cremate him, as somebody had whispered in Afeni's ear that Tupac's father might surface to contest her claim on the estate. So many of Tupac's songs spoke of his being buried in a coffin, but cremation would destroy any DNA for testing should Tupac's father surface. It would also destroy an evidence of poison. Keep in mind that Harry O took sick immediately after being given a 7-Up by David Kenner during his last friendly visit. Harry O nearly died, but Lydia Harris was convinced her husband had been poisoned. These are the footnotes for Part 8. Footnote 291. Brent Becker interview with Frank Alexander and R.J. Bond. Chris Blatchford statement given to Russell Poole. Russell Poole interview with Death Row Dave. Michael Moore tells Frank on Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings of his telephone conversations. Kevin Hackey interview with LAPD detectives Miller and Poole, 5/12/1998. Chris Blatchford statement given to Russell Poole. Russell Poole tape recorded interview with Death Row Dave on February 6, 20-something. Brent Becker interview with Frank Alexander and R.J. Bond. Tupac Conspiracy directed by R.J. Bond. Frank Alexander interview by Brent Becker on March 19, 1997. Kevin Hackey interview with LAP detectives Miller and Poole, 5/12/1998. Russell Poole interview with Death Row Dave. Interview of Corey Edwards on June 9, 1997 by Detective Golas. Footnote 305. Have Gun Will Travel, The Spectacular Rise and Violent Fall of Death Row Records by Ronan Rowe. 306. Kevin Hackey interview with LAP detectives Miller and Poole, 5/12/1998. Wiretap of corrupt Rampart cops. Tim Brennan affidavit to obtain search warrant. From the log of SLO Knox surveillance of Can-Am Studios, log entry 9/16/96. Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings of his telephone calls in the aftermath of Tupac's murder. Phoenix New Times, Reeling and Dealing by Dave Wylenga, November 28, 1996. SLO Knox detailed logs of his dealings with Can-Am Studios. Thank you for watching. This concludes Part 8 of Chaos Merchants. Stay tuned for Part 9.